Hi everybody, Ellen Valentine here with Leatherworks School. I'm thrilled to be here with you today to talk about the Fileteuse, or the electric creasing iron. This is a hallmark of fine leather work and fine leather goods, and it really is something that you'll want to invest in as soon as you decide that you're going to take this hobby or this pursuit seriously. It was my first investment years ago, and it really put me on the path to making some really terrific things. I want to talk to you about the equipment and all your options and things to consider as you invest in a creasing machine. So let's talk first. My very first machine was a Regad unit. This is it. It still works great. Still use it all the time. It's quite heavy. Everything that's inside obviously weighs quite a bit. You'll notice this has mechanical dials on it. Mechanical dials, this is a 2-port outlet. You can have 2 handles, 2 creasing irons operating at 2 different temperatures at the same time. Luckily, things have progressed. This unit, my first unit, was $1,400. It was quite expensive, quite an investment. And luckily for you all that are just now investing in a machine, they can be purchased for about $400. This is the Mason creaser. It also has 2 ports, but it now has a digital display here. 2 different temperature controls on each side. This is the Mason creaser. It's much, much lighter. You can get these machines from a variety of different sources. You can purchase them from Rocky Mountain Leather Supply, CMDA Chong. You can get them from Crimson Hides, Kevin Lee, among others. It seems like a new seller of these creasing machines is popping up every month or so. So you get the creasing machine, again, about $400 for the new generation machines, and then you need to purchase handles. So here's the handles, and I actually have 2 tips already loaded on my handles. Here are 2 handles. You'll want to get 2, and I would really say that with the creasing machines, you can get a single outlet, a single handle option, but you are going to constantly be shifting between 2 different creasing tips. And if you purchase just the single creasing unit machine, you're going to have to constantly be unscrewing a tip, waiting for it to cool down, and then inserting a new tip and waiting for it to heat up. So you lose quite a lot of time when you're shifting if you have just a single outlet unit. So I would strongly suggest you wait until you can afford to purchase the 2-prong machine. So again, here's the 2 handles. I'm going to talk about the tips here in a minute. My old Regad unit, the handles were slightly different, unfinished wood handles, but they are largely the same. This is what unites basically the power to the end of the tips that you're going to install. So those are your options. When you first purchase your machine, you want to purchase at least 2 tips, and I would recommend that you purchase the SO5 tip. These screw in to the end of your handle very easily. Screw into the end of your handle. You need to make sure that you're handling these with care. There are thin carrier wires running up the side here. You can see this side piece running up the side and jumping over to the main heating element here. These are fine wires. You want to make sure that you're handling these with care, because if this breaks, the entire heating unit is not going to work to the end of the tip. You might have to send them in for repairs or even purchase a new one. So take good care of your tips for sure. This is the SO5. It's just a single blade. There are no channels or any other things. Just a single edge here. This is used primarily to make either that single crease or to help you with edge polishing and edge smoothing. I use this tip a lot. So that's the SO5. The other one that I would recommend is that you get the FN3, or if you just make small leather goods like wallets, then you could consider the FN2. There aren't a lot of differences between the 2 of these tips, to be quite honest. Maybe just a 1/4 millimeter difference between the edge of your leather goods and where the crease is applied. I use the FN3 because I make a lot of handbags. These tips come in left-handed or right-handed versions, these FN3 or FN2. If you are left-handed, try to see if you can get a left-handed creasing iron tip for your machine. If you can't and you only have a right-handed tip and you are left-handed, you can still use this. I know leather workers that are left-handed that only have a right-handed tip, and they're fine. Instead of pulling this way, which I'm left-handed, I have a left-handed tip, I can use it this way. If you are using a right-handed tip and you're left-handed, you're going to need to turn it upside down, and with this trailing edge, you will use that to pull instead of the leading tip and pulling that way. So that's the difference. Most of you are probably right-handed. You don't need to worry about this, and there's a plethora of right-handed tips available in the market. So also, if your supplier doesn't have a left-handed tip, ask them if they can order one for you. You might have to wait a little bit, but it might be worth the wait. I have quite a lot of tips here. You can see I actually have made a piece of wood where I've used my drill press to drill holes into my stand here to hold all my tips. You don't need all these tips to start. I collect, one or two every year to add to my collection, and they all have specialty purposes to them. Two that I'll talk about here are the polishing irons. These are useful if you're using exotics. Not glazed alligator, however. You will damage your surface if you are polishing glazed alligator, but if you have a matte finished alligator or even possibly a millennium finished alligator, these polishing tips are great. If you notice, you get a small little indentation or crease in one of the tiles of the skin. So these are super for that, polishing tips. Another tip that you may want to consider is the sword tip. This is quite a long tip. I know a lot of friends that use this for their edge finishing and edge polishing instead of the SO5. The one thing about this, there's a lot of variability in temperature between the tip and the base. So that is something definitely to take into consideration. I learned with the SO5, so this is the one that I stick with because it's what I learned with first and what I prefer. But by all means, if you prefer the sword tip, then you're fine with that. Another tip to consider, and this is probably about the third tip I would purchase after your SO5 and your FN2 or your FN3. This is the FN3 MCR. This is a round tip. You do not need to specify left-handed or right-handed. It will work for either. This is great for going around tight corners. So if you're making wallets where you have a curve in the corner or a curve on a bag flap, this is indispensable, this FN3 MCR. And oh, by the way, some of the new makers may be using slightly different names or numbers for these tips, so you want to make sure that you're considering that as well. The difference between the F3 and the FN3, I'm trying to see here if I have my F3 with me. I may have not packed it, but the difference between a straight F3 and an FN3 is the F3 is just going to make a channel. They're just going to literally make that crease line. It's not doing anything to your edge. The FN series is helping with the rounding effect that you want on your edges. So definitely look for the FN series. If you have an F3, then I would strongly consider upgrading to the FN3 tip. They also have a lot of other neat tips for you to consider. One I'll show you here is that they have a general purpose or interchangeable tip, and some of the newer models have quite a lot of these. So this has just got a threaded screw on the end. Here's an example. This is actually a heated burnishing tip. So you can purchase that. You purchase this once, and then you can purchase a variety of different screw-in tips. So this is a heated edge burnishing for if you're working with vegetable tanned leather. Another thing that is very cool is they have what is called a composter or a composer. This is actually a type holder. You can purchase the type, purchase the holder, and it screws in to the base, it screws into the base of this interchangeable tip, if I can get it threaded here, and you can just put this on the end of your handle, and instead of having a Kingsley or a Quick Print or some other hot foil machine, you can use this to actually do your imprinting. You can buy whole alphabets to go with this. When I purchased this, this was the only size type holder available, and this type is quite small. I would say it's probably about 14 point type. You can, I believe now, get even larger composters or composers to put larger type in as well. Not inexpensive, by the way, to do this option. So you'll definitely want to consider the cost of this compared to the cost of purchasing a Kingsley or a metallic elephant or something like that. So those are the tips. A lot of people ask me about the heat settings, and I will tell you that you need to test. If I told you, hey, I want you to use heat setting 2.8, you might find the 2.8 is too hot for your machine. It might be calibrated slightly differently. It also varies a lot by your leather. If you're working with very, very light leathers, a white leather or a light taupe, you're going to use a lot lower temperature than if you were using or working with a very dark leather. You want to test. So get your scraps out and test how your creasing is going and how the edge polishing is going. If you use the SO5 or the sword to help polish your edges, you want to make sure it's not too hot, it's not melting your paint. You definitely want to make sure your paint is fully set before applying any heat. But again, you're going to want to test your temperatures. Just as a general reference for my machine, I do typically work between about 2.6 and 3.6. But for light leathers, I can even go down to 1.9. So you're really going to need to test. I know other friends, they're putting theirs up to 7 or 8. So you definitely want to check that and go with what makes sense for your machine, for your leather. So that's it for today. Just wanted to introduce you to the creasing machines. One thing I do want to say is if you have an alcohol lamp and you have a manual creaser, that is perfectly fine if it has that FN profile, that rounded channel in the tip. That will work. But what you'll find for fine leather goods, because you do a lot of creasing, because you use the tips for edge polishing, it becomes quite an effort to maintain a consistent temperature for all of your work. So that's where these electric creasers come in, is giving you that consistent temperature that you need throughout all of your operations. So there you have it. If anyone has any questions at all about the creasing machines, you're welcome to follow along at Leatherworks School. You can send me a DM there. I'll do my best to help you. Again, look for the suppliers: Crimson Hides, Kevin Lee, CMDA Chong, Rocky Mountain Leather Supply, to get your creasing machine for fine leather goods. Thanks very much, and I hope to see you soon.